Present.
Vice Mayor Brooks.
Here.
And Mayor Peterson.
Here.
Thank you.
And before we move, thank you. Before we move forward, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Chloe, for some information about how people can participate in tonight's meeting.
Yes, thank you. Hello and welcome to the council meeting. In accordance with the current Santa Cruz County Health Order and the Governor's Executive Order N-2920, this meeting is not physically open to the public. Council and staff are meeting via Zoom, and there are several ways for the public to watch and participate. Information on how to join the meeting over Zoom or with your phone is available on our website, cityofcapitola.org, on the slides now shown, and on the published meeting agenda. That's all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. We did roll call, so let's move on to the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag.
to the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. We are going to move on to presentations. It looks like we have a presentation on Children's Cancer Awareness Month.
Hi, my name is Federico Salazar. I work for Jacob's Heart Children's Death Support Service. On behalf of our families and our staff, we would like to thank you for your support, and I'd like to proclaim September's Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And I want to thank the City of Capitola for supporting us. Do you guys get that?
Great. Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much.
much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for bringing that to our awareness. September is Children's Cancer Awareness Month, and we're so glad that you were here to share that with us this evening.
Thank you.
All right. If there's nothing else on our presentations, we will move forward to item 3, additional materials. Is there any additional information for tonight's meeting?
There were no additional materials received.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda?
Staff has no changes.
Okay. Now we will go to public comment. Now is the time for any members of the public to address the council on items that are not on tonight's agenda. I'll turn it over to our moderator to let me know if we have any attendees raising their hand or any emails that came in.
I do not see any hands raised, and I do not see any emails.
All right. Thank you. With that, we will move on. We'll close public comment and move on to city council and staff comments. Let's start with staff. Does staff have any comments?
I think Nikki Bryant has a comment.
All right.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, council members. I wanted to let the public know that the Capitola Public Safety and Community Service Foundation is hosting a fundraising campaign in order to raise scholarship funds for the out-of-school time program that is serving school-aged children and working families by providing distance learning programs and recreation activities. Anybody that is interested in donating to that scholarship fund, they can go to the GoFundMe website and search Capitola Recreation OST, and they will be navigated to the fundraising campaign.
Great. Thank you so much. Any additional staff comments?
It's fine.
All right, hearing none, we'll bring it back to council, and I see that Vice Mayor Brooks has her hand up for comments.
Thank you, Mayor Peterson. Unfortunately, the increase think the visibility of trauma and death at the hands of racial injustice isn't doing as much as it should be. I'd like to encourage all of you to ask yourself, are you an ally of the Black Lives Matter movement, or are you part of the problem? If you think there is not a problem in Capitola or just want to learn more, I would encourage everyone to attend a community forum being put on by our residents of Capitola. And also I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge just a few of the people that have lost their lives to racism. Eric Gardner, Ezell Ford, Michelle Cusso, Tanisha Anderson, Tamira Wright, Natasha McKenna, Walter Scott, Betty Jones, Philandro Castile, Awesome Jean, Atatiana Jefferson, Eric Reason, Dominique Clayton, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Brooks, for those important comments, and thank you also for your participation, as well as the city manager and the police chief for participating last week in a community conversation about racial justice. It was so important to have you all there, and I received feedback from some of the organizers saying how grateful they were to have our city leadership present at that kind of conversation. So thank you again for bringing that to the forefront of our conversation, Vice Mayor Brooks. I don't see any other hands up. Okay, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and close our council comments and bring it to our consent calendar. All the items on tonight's consent calendar will be enacted by one motion in the form listed on the agenda. Unless any member of the public or any city council member wants to remove an item for separate consideration. And it looks like Councilmember Bertrand, you have your hand up. Do you want to remove an item?
No, I just have a simple question.
Okay.
Okay, I guess, Jamie, this is addressed to you or whomever is appropriate on your staff. Item 7D, dealing with the grand jury response in terms of risk preparedness. So if you can't answer, that's fine. But I noticed well, first of all, that whole missive was quite interesting, and I need to go over it a little bit more. But many of the responses had to do with, the things that were brought up, I think, were fairly decent in terms of risk management and preparing for things that may be of risk in terms of our revenue, for instance. And we don't have the staff and the time and the bandwidth, and I totally understand that. Is there any effort that the county is doing that we could be a part of, or maybe that could be brought up at the mayor's committee when you meet, because this, I think, is a broader function, not just something that can be adequately done by our small town, which is the smallest in Santa Cruz.
So I'm happy to respond, but before I do, I think I'll just ask the mayor, do you want me to just respond, or would you like a little bit of a staff explanation? Do you want to move on the rest of consent, and then how do
we can do it later, yeah.
Let's go ahead and get the answer to this question just briefly, and then we can move forward. But I do want to clarify, I don't have the mayor. There is no mayor's committee on risk preparedness.
Oh no, just the normal one during the year where you bring up subjects for the county and anyone else to address. That mayor committee.
The selection committee. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. City Manager Goldstein, if you could just briefly respond to that, and then we can move forward.
Sure. So very quickly, grand juries are groups of citizens that are impaneled to look into government operations for evidence of fraud or improper use of public funds. And so our current grand jury was impaneled, and they wrote a report entitled Managers of Risk or Victims of Risk, Rocked by the Shocks. And this report was directed to all the cities in Santa Cruz County, as well as the county. And, I'm not going to do too much effort to try to summarize what they're finding, but basically, loosely, they were critical of the level of sort of risk analysis that jurisdictions were doing and suggested that some of the models used by the federal government could be employed here. So there were a number of responses that the city of Capitola had to reply to and suggestions. And so my staff worked with staff from the other jurisdictions on preparing a response to make sure that we were all kind of looking at this in a similar way. And so that is, we did coordinate with the county and the other cities on the responses. But I think more specifically, if you have a specific question, Councilmember Bertrand, I could actually address it if it was focused on one of the specific findings.
Well, the way I look at it is, in a sense, we're all in the same bucket. You know, whatever hits Capitola is going to hit Watsonville, you know, Santa Cruz County, Santa Cruz City, all of us, all of this area. So it seems to me, in terms of risk management, we could get some direction from a county effort.
Councilmember Bertrand, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm looking at the agenda, and we're supposed to, any items that are pulled for separate discussion need to be considered following general government. And so if it was just a quick response you were looking from the city manager, we can get that now. But if you want a further dialogue or conversation about how we can partner with the county, we're going to need to move that to the end of our agenda.
Well, that's fine. My question, basically, I was trying to phrase it, is I'm wondering if the county has any effort like that or plan to do that. And then if they don't, maybe it could be brought up at the mayor's selection committee and approached as a subject.
Okay. Yeah, we will definitely find out about that.
Okay, that's fine with me.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Okay. With that, we will entertain a motion for our consent calendar.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Bertrand. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilmember Story. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Councilmember Bertrand.
Aye.
Councilmember Bottorff.
Aye.
Councilmember Story.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Brooks.
Aye.
Mayor Peterson.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on now to item 8, general government and public hearings, and we'll start with 8A, budget update. And I'll turn it over to staff.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So as the Mayor just mentioned, this is going to be a fiscal year 1920 year-end budget update. And then from this budget update, we'll also have a couple of staff recommendations for budget amendments in fiscal year 2021, which I'll cover and then summarize at the end. So let me share my screen with you. Can everybody see that okay?
You're not sharing.
Not sharing.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
Where's Larry when we need him?
I'm right here. If you're having trouble, you want me to I can put it on my screen
Yeah, if you don't mind.
for you. Absolutely. Yep. Give me 1 sec.
Oh wait, I think I might have it now.
Okay.
Is that better?
Nope.
What is going on?
All right, technology. Here we go. Okay.
All right.
Oh, wait, we got, there we go.
How does that look, folks?
Looks good.
Okay.
So I guess you'll have to move the slides for me, Jamie.
I will.
Okay, let's get started. So first I'm just going to go over a quick timeline. As you're all aware, our fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th, and we break those fiscal years down into 4 quarters. So first I'll start with fiscal year 1920, quarter 3. If you all remember, in the 3rd quarter, March 16th, the shelter-in-place orders were issued, which was basically just the last 2 weeks of that quarter. We didn't really know what the impact would be to sales tax until May 20th, which is important if you go to the next slide, because we are working on our 2021 budget preparation and adoption. So we get the amount that we're going to get on May 20th. We don't actually get the data behind it and analyzed by our consultant until generally 5 to 6 weeks later. So we're in budget preparation and adoption without really knowing the details of the third quarter sales tax and have zero information on Q4, which is typical, but a little more challenging when you're in a global pandemic. Next slide. On Q4, which runs April through June, May 1st, we began reopening some of the businesses that had been shut down. But again, we don't really know what the impact is on the sales tax front, which is 50% of our general fund revenue, until August 20th. So we just got that data a couple of weeks ago, which kind of led to this meeting. Next slide. And then Q1, which began the fiscal year, early July, some of those shelter-in-place restrictions were put back in place. Again, we won't get our sales tax number until November 20th, and we won't even really have an analysis of that data until probably, if we're lucky, late December, but with holidays, more than likely early January, which is important because if you recall, we entered into some labor concessions, and those are set to expire on December 26th. And we won't know what our Q2 sales tax number is until February 20th. So the plan right now is we'll get the number in late November and then be back before council in early to mid-December and review that as we prepare for kind of December 26th and how we get ready for our mid-year budget. Next slide, please. So by way of background, when at the onset of COVID-19, we made some major revenue projections or reduced revenue projections to these four were the primary, it was across the board, but these were the four primary revenues that we were looking at that we thought would be impacted. So as you can see on the first one, sales tax, we had reduced that budget by 50% for the fourth quarter of 1920, and then 21% for the entire fiscal year of 2021. TOT, 95% in the fourth quarter, 71% in this fiscal year. Recreation, 95% in the fourth quarter, 25% in 21. And parking, 50% both in the fourth quarter as well as this fiscal year. In addition, in order to get some of the savings that we needed, we had 6 vacant positions when that, or soon-to-be vacant positions, when that first shelter-in-place order came out on March 16th. And so we froze those 6 positions. We then entered into negotiations seeking employee concessions. And during that time, we had 3 additional positions that were vacated. And I'll touch on those a little bit later. And then since the beginning of this fiscal year, we've had 1 resignation, and we've been notified of 2 potential retirements. So I'm going to go through each of those 4 revenues, and just to kind of give you the format on that, have the adopted fourth quarter budget amount, what our assumption was, and then compare that to what our actual receipts were. And then I'll go through the 2021 budget, the budget amount for those 4 revenues, what our assumption was, and then recommended changes, if any, to those projections. So first, sales tax. Our adopted fourth quarter budget was just under $2 million. We reduced that by 50%, so just under $1 million. Actual receipts actually came in at $1.7 million, a little over, but it included $362,000 of one-time payments, or not one-time, sorry, prior period adjustments, which we always have prior period adjustments. It's just that's much larger than what we normally get. We believe that 300 of the 362, 300,000, 362,000 is one-time payments related to the deferral program that the state implemented. So we will be meeting with our sales tax consultant and see if that's actually what it is, but we're pretty confident that that's what that is. So that if we adjust our revenue, it's down to a little over 1.4 million, which represents a 29% reduction. So still much better than the 50% that we were originally projecting. For fiscal year 2021, our annual budget is 6.3 million, a little over 6.3 million, which is a 21% reduction. So not quite the 29, but we're starting to see some better performance. So these reductions in the fourth quarter are for the really are from the middle of March through June 30th. And what we saw was big reductions early, sales tax not as much, the other revenues we did, and then they started to bounce back a little bit as we got into June, July, and now into August. So again, we will be meeting with our sales tax consultant that first week of October, going through all of that data and confirming if that $3,000 is actually one-time payments as we suspect, or if we're going to see prior period adjustments as we continue on through the shelter-in-place orders. So because of that, there's no budget amendment recommended at this time for sales tax revenue. The next revenue is TOT. Our adopted fourth quarter budget was a little over $410,000. That one we reduced by 95% down to $20,508. Actual receipts were a little over $119,000, which represented a 71% reduction. So again, that one we really saw where it took a hard hit in March and April and then started coming back a little bit in May, a little better in June, and July and August we're actually only down about 30%. August, I'm not 100% sure, but I've checked with a couple of our operators, and they're down about 30%. So our adopted fiscal year 2021 annual budget was $475.8, which was a 71% reduction. But again, a lot of that 71% in the fourth quarter happened early on during the first 6 to 8 weeks. So our revenues are really outpacing the projection of 71% of a reduction. So for that reason, we're recommending 2 budget amendments. The first is to increase TOT revenue by $344,529. That would take us to 50% of what our adopted budget was in the prior year. And that would increase general fund revenue, TOT revenue, by just under $321,000. And then on the restricted TOT, $12,600 for local business groups and $11,000 for early childhood and youth programs. And with that $11,000 for the early childhood and youth programs, we're recommending a budget amendment to increase the outside of school time scholarship program by $11,000. If you recall, we budgeted, I believe, $14,500, and we have already given out that entire amount of scholarships, and we still have a need for more, which is the reason for this recommendation. On the recreation fee side, adopted fourth quarter budget was $269,000. We cut that by 95% down to just under $13,500. We had receipts of $28,000, which was a 90% reduction. That excess revenue basically just kind of offset expenditures. A lot of what we were doing with junior guards and camp that started in June, so a little bit of hit in June, but a lot more of that activity that we saw, the revenues are actually in this fiscal year. So our adopted fiscal year 2021 budget is $507,225 as far as recreation revenues, which is a 25% reduction from prior year. So far year to date, as I mentioned, a lot of that revenue that we saw from the junior guards and the camp programs that took place is in this year. So right now, or through July, we had, or August, I'm sorry, we had $162,000 of revenue offset by $160,000 of expenditures. So this is one we want to continue to watch, and for that reason, no budget amendment recommended at this time on recreation side for the fees. And then parking revenue, our adopted budget for the fourth quarter was $274,418. Again, cut that one in half down to $137. Actual receipts were $114,609, which was a 58% reduction. But again, those were looking better in the later months like June, July, and August than they were early on. So that 58% again is kind of spread out over that period. I believe if I remember correctly, July was only down about 35%. Adopted budget for parking revenues was $428,963 for this fiscal year, which was a 50% reduction from prior year. Again, we had seen improvement coming in, so I think the 58% that we saw in the fourth quarter is still a little bit on the high side. We saw improvement prior to the fire. That may have come down a little in August, but they were performing pretty well right before the fire. So fiscal year revenues to date are only down 48%. So since we were at 50%, this is one that we want to continue to watch for the next couple of months and then discuss again when we come back to council in December. So no budget amendment recommended on parking revenue at this time. From the staffing perspective, again, at the onset of COVID-19, we froze the 6% positions that were vacant. Again, there's 3 additional vacancies that came up during those labor negotiations. However, savings from all 9 vacancies were utilized when we prepared the 2021 budget. Since July 1st, we've had the potential for 3 additional vacancies. Those include a police officer, parking enforcement officer, and senior mechanic. Those 3 positions are funded, fully funded in the 2021 budget. And the recommendation from staff is to fill the 3 positions. The police officer is actually vacant now, so we'd like to start on that one immediately, as they're already down another officer and a sergeant from the sworn side. And then the parking enforcement officer and senior mechanic, as those retirements are finalized. On the staff training side, if you recall, we cut all non-reimbursable department training budgets were eliminated. So really the only thing we left in there from a training perspective was for the post training with police officers. So police officers are continuing with their training, but that's because it's reimbursable through the post program. However, we do have a city clerk and building inspector positions are filled by new employees. It didn't complete what would be their normal training when they come into those positions. So we're recommending a budget amendment for $11,000 for those 2 employees to continue their on-the-job training programs. And I'll break that out. I have a summary in a couple of slides, and I'll break that $11,000 out between the 2 positions. And then this is just for folks that are a little more visual. This is our org chart. And the boxes that you have up there in red are the frozen positions. And then for the police officer, there's actually the box around police officers has 2 positions, 1 frozen and 1 vacant. And then the boxes that are in blue, parking enforcement officer and senior mechanic, are the 2 pending retirements. So just to kind of give more of an illustrative look to that. On the CARES Act, when we were doing the budget preparation, we didn't really have any information on CARES Act funding as far as what was going to be available to Capitola and what were the parameters as far as getting that money. So since the beginning of this fiscal year, we've now been allocated $124,805. They're paying it in monthly installments, which started in July, so we have our first 2 installments have come in. And we also learned that public safety salaries and benefits are considered reimbursable. So last week I had to submit our first CARES Act funding report, which covered March through June, and our public safety salary and benefit costs, as you can see there, $424,500 far exceeds the $124,805. So we're confident now that we won't have to return any of that money, that we're fully qualified for reimbursements. Hopeful there'll be another round, but I don't really have any solid information on that. But because of this right here, if you go to the next slide, staff's recommending 2 additional budget amendments. The first is to increase the grant revenue by $124,805, since that's now really a solid number. And then on the expenditure side, increase janitorial services budget by $10,000. If that's approved, that'll take our janitorial services budget to $32,000, which is about 70% of what we traditionally budget for that category.
Can I add, the purpose behind the janitorial service expansion is really to enhance cleaning the public restrooms. And the intent behind that is it frees up our public works crews who are short-staffed, and on top of that, we aren't using our summer seasonal help that we usually use. So it'll free them up to do a lot more of the winter preparations that we typically do. So it's a relatively limited investment that we see addresses some of the issues that we've seen with all the cuts that we've had this summer. Back to you, Jim.
Okay. So this is the summary of the budget amendment. So on the general fund revenue side, you see the federal grants increased by the $124,805. TOT revenue that would go to the general fund just under $321,000, and then the restricted TOT revenue is $11,000 for early childhood and youth programs, $12,600 to local business groups. On the expenditure side, city manager training, which is for the city clerk position, $6,000. The janitorial services that Jamie just talked about for $10,000. CDD, or Community Development Department training for the building inspector position, and then the $11,000 for the Recreation OST program on the scholarships. So fiscal impact, excuse me, from these budget amendments would increase general fund revenues by $445,734. Expenditures would increase by $32,000. And then if you remember, the adopted budget that we're operating under right now is actually drawing just under $100,000 out of fund balance. These budget amendments would then structurally balance our budget and have revenues exceeding expenditures by around $314,000, which would lead to an estimated ending fund balance at June 30th of 21 of $993,000. Now, again, we're going to come back in December and have, I think, some more discussions on that fund balance, but at this point, staff's thought was with still so many moving pieces going on that we didn't want to kind of overextend ourselves and then try to retract, which is why we didn't really dip into that. On the restricted TOT fiscal impact, increased revenue of $23,600, but again, $12,600 for local business groups, $11,000 for early childhood youth programs, and then increasing the OST scholarship expenditures from $11,000 up to $25,800. For public comment.
So,
Go ahead.
I think this would conclude, right? The presentation.
Yeah, I just have the public comment and then the recommended action.
Okay. The public comment will come after council questions. So.
Okay. So
questions.
All right. Thank you so much. And it looks like we do have Vice Mayor Brooks and then Councilmember Bosworth with some questions. So let's start with Vice Mayor Brooks.
Thanks, Mayor Peterson. Just a quick question on page 229 of the staff report. There's mention of the trainings associated with staff. And it looks like there's mention of a 5,000 and 6,000. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the $6,000 is the city clerk position, and that number is derived from what we have done in the past for on-site, in-person training. If this training moves forward, more than likely it would be virtual, and I don't think we would require the full 6,000. But if something changes between now, I think the first session is a little later this year or early next year. If something changes before then and they do live in-person training, we at least have the proper budgeted amount. And then the 5,000 is for the building inspector and community development department, and that is also based on previous trainings that we've done with other employees that have occupied those positions previously.
When are the trainings taking place?
The city clerk, if I remember correctly, is in the spring, possibly late winter, early spring, with the first session, and then there's a second session, I believe, in late May or early June. On the building inspector, I do not know exactly when that is.
So my question is, if we're going to come back in December, what's the purpose of bringing this forward now with such? I mean, $6,000 is pretty significant if no one's traveling any longer. I'm just wondering why this is being brought now.
Why don't I take that question? So the reason why we were recommending it was simply because we're sort of developing, one thing, people make plans relatively far in advance. And I also wanted to signal to these employees that the training that they normally would be getting is back on track. I agree that the figure looks quite high, particularly for the city clerk training, where really what we're talking about is probably going to be virtual training opportunities. So, frankly, it was more, if anything, to signal to the employees so that they knew that they could plan on that and that we were committed to that position. But you're right, we don't need to have the funding, I don't believe, until we could do it at the December date.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go to Councilmember Bosworth and then Councilmember Bertrand.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'll direct this towards the city manager. It looks like the TOT and the sales tax was depressed, but the most robust form of revenue was the parking, it appears. And I'm just trying to think if the only reason that it was down, or if you think that the reason, the question is, do you think the reason it's down is because we're missing 40 to 50 primetime places? And, you know, would that, is there any kind of analysis that you have that if those places per space, how would that fit into what we would consider a normal budget allocation?
So overall, when we look at parking revenue, as Jim presented it, it was 58% reduced during the fourth quarter last year. So that's April, May, June. And so far this year, we're running 48% down. During the April, May, June period, remember we had the upper and lower lots closed. It was shelter in place. Things were just really quiet. So I would attribute, I think that what we're seeing now with the 48% reduction, my guess is a decent chunk of that is being driven by the loss of spaces for the outdoor dining. In general, those spaces, and correct me if I'm wrong, Public Works Director Jesberg, about $2,000 a space is what they generate on an annual basis, those ones on the Esplanade right there. We can do some further analysis and bring it back to council the next time around. But I think that without a doubt, the loss of those spaces we're seeing in the revenue for sure. And Steve, if you have anything to add, please.
No, I think it's about $2,400 a space, so you're pretty accurate there. And I think the number of spaces that we lost is about 50 spaces down along the Esplanade. So that's a good chunk of the spaces in the village.
And I would speculate that it's probably not a one-for-one loss. You know, that at some point those spaces people were displaced and moved somewhere else. But the question is, were they moved into the Swenson lot and creating money for him and not for the city, or moved into Back Cove, which probably has some traffic benefits for the city, but just in terms of meter rates, it's 33% less, I think, in the upper and lower lots.
Thank you.
All right, and then Councilmember Bertrand.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask a similar question, and the second question I'm going to ask, because Ed sort of asked it, is this normal of revenue, is what we're seeing right now reflective of that, or is it pretty much an overlay of what we've been seeing from the pandemic and everything else? Are there any normal trends that are starting to reappear? That's basically the question.
Go ahead, Jamie. You want to?
No.
Well, so what I'm starting to see, it appears that TOT is coming back and leveling off a little bit. It could be if the fire and all the evacuees and everybody, kind of staying away may impact us a little bit. It doesn't appear to be that much. Sales tax, it dropped off kind of quick but not very far, and it seems to be kind of pretty stable over the last few months. Below what we normally would get, but fairly stable, but close to what our projections were for this fiscal year. The parking, again, it dropped off really early, but like Jamie said, in the first couple of months when everything was really quiet and there was nobody here, everything was shut down. But those have really kind of leveled off as well and seem to be operating close to that 50% projection that we had.
Okay, a little follow-up. We do have a marijuana provider up near Piece of My Heart, and the question there is, what is their performance? And then the second one, they're still remodeling. Do we have any sense of when that's going to open and give us some more revenue?
So the first one that opened up there behind Piece of My Heart at the Hook seems to be pretty consistent over the last couple of months. Not generating quite as much as we thought it would, but it's consistent and seems to be slowly building, although this last month was a little bit down. The other one on 41st is going to be called Deep Thought, I believe, and they just inquired with me this week about getting the forms and getting prepared to submit, or at least getting all of the process to submit their cannabis tax. So based on that, I'm assuming they're going to open in relatively short time, but I don't have a timeline on that.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if we're on track for the projections there, you know, because one didn't open and one did, but it's not performing as well as we thought. So
Sure.
do we need to adjust?
This budget anticipated that the second shop wouldn't open up until sometime during the second quarter of this fiscal year. So if that happens relatively soon, then we'll probably be pretty close. If they're delayed past the first of the year, then we're going to have to probably make some adjustments.
Okay. And I was wondering if you'd give a little explanation. I didn't know that our police, et cetera, would be paid for by the CARES Act. And does that include the OT that we provided for people that went and helped out in the CZU fires?
So the CARES Act is really for the COVID-19. For everything that we did as far as mutual aid on the CZU Lightning Complex fire, we've tracked all of that time. I've been working with Sergeant Ryan down there to get all of that tracked. Now I need to go back to the county now that things are starting to settle down and figure out what is our process to get reimbursed. But my understanding is all of the overtime will be reimbursed.
That's great. So during that time, we were fully covered. I don't know how many people we provided. Maybe you could talk about that.
I'll have the chief chime in. What I remember is I believe we had 4 officers rotating, 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening, but I'll let the chief get into that because I don't want to step into police operations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're correct, Jim, Councilmember Bertrand. 2 officers day shift, 2 officers evening shift, working 12-hour shifts. And that mutual aid ended officially this past Monday.
Okay, thanks. And what shift was the officer that we're going to need to replace covering?
Evening shift.
Evening. Okay, normally we have 2, correct?
That's correct. And I'm staffing is 2.
So if we don't replace that, we'll only have 1.
No, we're 1 body down. We make adjustments on our schedule.
You'll make adjustments. Okay, got it. I just want to make sure I understood what we're talking about. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Any additional questions from questions from council? Seeing none, we will go to public comment. I'll turn it over to our moderator to see if there's any public comment on this item.
I don't see any attendees, and I don't see any emails.
All right, with that, we will bring it back. Any comments from council members? And if not, we will entertain a motion and go to a vote. Do we have any motion? There's a motion on this, right?
Yeah, the recommended action is up on the screen.
Oh, there it is. Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I'll move staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Story, seconded by Councilmember Bosworth. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Councilmember Bertrand.
I agree.
Councilmember Bosworth.
Aye.
Councilmember Story.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Brooks.
Aye.
Mayor Peterson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carries unanimously. We'll move on now to item 8B regarding a code of conduct for city council and commissioners.
All right. So Vice Mayor Brooks or Councilmember Story, do one of you guys want to kick this one off for us?
Sure, I'll be more than happy to do that. Thank you, Sam, for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of both of us. Jamie, if you don't mind pulling up the slides again so I could read the first
Sure.
slide.
And then we will get to slideshow from beginning. Why does it always do it this way?
All right, I'll let you get going. Well, I just want to first say thank you again to Councilmember Story for participating in the subcommittee on the Code of Conduct for members. You met on January 23rd. I'm just going to minimize my screen here. On January 23rd, City Council held a hearing regarding developing a Code of Conduct for Capitola. Shortly thereafter, Council formed an ad hoc subcommittee consisting of myself and Councilmember Story. The ad hoc subcommittee met with staff, and again, I want to thank staff and our city attorney, Samantha, for participating to review some of the different options that other cities have put together for their code of conduct. So we reviewed those examples, and we created a draft for Capitola. The code of conduct included is in your packet today, and it is recommended by both myself and Councilmember Story. Oh, and then Jamie has several more to present about what it is. We have several more slides.
All right. So I was just going to briefly touch on what is here in the Code of Conduct. I think more than anything, I think what I'd really like the council to appreciate is this is going to be your document. This is intended to be a document that's going to, you're imposing on yourself to regulate, to normalize behavior, to make it clear what expectations are and how you would deal with issues of violations of that. And so it's a little bit awkward for me to sort of be proposing this, but nevertheless, I'm gonna do my best to quickly walk through it. And I think the best format would be if there's any questions we could, between myself, City Attorney Zutler, or Councilmember Story, or Vice Mayor Brooks, one of us would give our best to answer it. So the key thing to remember here is that nothing here is replacing any law. All the laws about conflict of interest, open meetings, all of those things, they still apply. Really what this is intended to be is a framework for how council members want to work as a group, and if there's violations of that code of conduct, how they would be considered. I think those are kind of the key things to think about. The code of conduct, as recommended, has, I think that's something like 6 different sections: core values, transparency and decision-making standards, how council members are supposed to interact with each other and city staff and other appointed officials, standards for relations between council members and how they behave at meetings, how they communicate with other public boards and agencies, and then how to investigate violations of these standards. So touching a little bit more deeply into core values, this is something that many other codes of conduct that we looked at had in them. And what we did was we went through a couple of other examples and then ended up organizing them into these 4 key areas, which is responsibility, integrity, respect and value for others, and then accountability. The next section in the code of conduct is transparency and decision-making. And that really focuses primarily on kind of really making it clear that the Brown Act applies. I think the only sort of key thing in here is making it clear that closed session discussions, closed session materials, that stays in the closed session. Fairness of process. We have sections talking about the council members make decisions based on the merits, that they would disclose information that other council members may not have. So in particular, this is an issue around quasi-judicial hearings, which is when you are weighing in on issuing a permit, for example, or someone's appeal of a decision, that it's very important to remain neutral and to disclose any information that may not be readily available to your other peers. Other things in the fairness of process, about thinking about things from all sides and ensuring that we give people fair hearings, that we maintain proper decorum and that we're attentive during our meetings. The next section talks about ethical decision-making, really kind of focused on making sure that your decisions you're following FPPC advice, you're getting FPPC advice, and there's times when maybe just for reasons that maybe not be purely FPPC related, you may need to step away just because of the appearance of potential conflicts. The second, the ethical principles to follow. This is a little bit of a catch-all, and these were things that we saw in other people's codes of conduct, and sometimes they seem to be related to particular issues that cities had. One city had a great deal of information in their code of conduct about city stationery, for example, but we pulled these things in here talking about avoiding personal interests, no personal gain, using city stationery only for city business. Members would not appear in front of city council or another body representing private interests, and then refraining from accepting gifts or favors that might compromise your independence down the road. Efficiency and accountability. I think a lot of the first key here is respecting the council manager form of government. So the direction is given to me or the city attorney, and it's our job to implement that. We talk about interactions with members of the public, interaction with members. So we're talking about the positions of mayor and pro tem mayor, the mayor's role during the meetings, and the mayor's role as a spokesman for the city. I think the one area where we probably had the most interesting conversation was around enforcement. And I would say that in most of the codes of conduct we looked at, they kind of punted on this issue. I think that the phrase that we saw in a lot of different codes of conduct were that the intent of these codes is for them to be self-enforcing. And that was it. And I think many of you followed another jurisdiction in this county who went through some real challenges around codes of conduct and council member relations. And the process of how to adjudicate differences of opinion, particularly around these sort of code of conduct issues, is very challenging for cities. And so what we really focused on, the subcommittee focused on, was trying to put down on paper how it would be dealt with. And basically, to summarize, what we ended up coming up with is that if complaints are made, it comes to me and the city attorney, and the city attorney would then make a determination whether or not there's a potential violation of the law. And if there's a violation of the law, identify what path that investigation or what would be the appropriate next step to take. If it's a violation of this code of conduct in and of itself, at that point, then it would be forwarded to the city council, and the city council would then make a determination in open session about what the next step is, whether to order an investigation or to take further action. And then lastly, the code of conduct includes basically three types of penalties, if you will, starting at the bottom, censor, which was considered sort of the least formal type of reprimand, least formal type of penalty that could be imposed. Excuse me, I'm backwards. Reprimand is the least formal type of penalty. It can be either verbal or written. Censor is a more formal statement of displeasure. It often would be accompanied by removing a council member from their position on appointed boards and commissions. Council members don't have the ability to remove a council member from city council. And then the highest level of repercussion would be dismissal, and that wouldn't apply to council members, but it would apply to other city officials could be removed from their office. And either it would be pursuant to the Muni Code, which is how we deal with the Planning Commission. We have explicit language in the Muni Code about how a planning commissioner could be removed, or other boards and commissioners who really serve in the council's pleasure. So, Code of Conduct also includes several important appendices that outline, really help people, I think, understand some of the framework for kind of the undergirding, if you will, of the California law that applies in this situations. And then we also had a signature page where new council members, as they come on board in this council, would all sign and acknowledge that they've read, received, and intend to abide by the code of conduct. So with that, I'm available for questions. Councilmember Brooks or Councilmember Story, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, Jamie, thank you. I just wanted to make a clarification. If you go back to that slide under determination, and just to clarify, that actually under determination, the dismissal refers to the dismissal of the complaint, not of the complaintee. And then the next level was reprimand, and Jamie described that accurately, and final, it's censure. So those were the levels of determination. And then removal of any commissioners and board members was the separate section, as Jamie mentioned. And I just wanted to make that clarification. And also just to thank all the staff, Jamie and Larry and Sam, that assisted us in going through a lot of material and several drafts of this code of conduct. And also want to extend my appreciation to Vice Mayor Brooks for participating and actually she was I think the leader in bringing this before us. So thank you to all of you and for allowing me to participate and present this code of conduct. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Story. Looks like Councilmember Bertrand has a question.
Yeah, I have two areas of concern that I have questions about. One is accepting gifts, services, and other special considerations. So I'm sure the answer is I can do this. And if I get a free comp ticket to go to an event, like the one around here is the Monterey Economic Forum, that's not considered, I believe, for personal, so is that an issue? Just one clarification.
Let's take a look at our code of conduct.
Yeah.
And see what. So the language in your code of conduct says members will refrain from accepting gifts, favors, or promises of future benefits that might compromise their independence or the appearance that they are independent and unbiased. So to the extent that a nonprofit is willing to give you a entry into a conference that they're putting on, I think it would depend on the situation. Does the nonprofit seek funding from the city? If the nonprofit doesn't seek funding from the city, I think my answer would probably be they're not. You're getting a gift. It's under the FPPC limit, and there's no potential for you're not compromising your independence. If they do look for money from the city, then I might think twice about something like that. City Attorney Zettler, do you have anything other perspective?
No, I would say the same, except to add that it would really, if it were an issue, it would be a decision for your fellow council members. And so when you think about whether to accept it, you might think about it through that lens.
Yeah, because I usually go to these conferences to get information about a subject, and it's not necessarily to be influenced. But so you're suggesting standing it up and then let the city council determine that?
I'm sorry, you cut out. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So I usually go to conferences to get information, to be educated, basically. So you're suggesting if there seems to be an issue, as Jamie suggested, for a group that wants to get a donation or funding or whatever, bringing that up to city council and have them make a vote on that?
No, because then you would, well, you could, I mean, you would need to agendize the item and have it be discussed at a council meeting. I would assume that if every council member did that, you might bog down your meeting. And so my suggestion was, when you're thinking about whether or not to accept it, you should consider what your fellow council members might say, and what you might say if another council member accepted the same. My guess is, just like City Manager Goldstein said, if it is a nonprofit that does not request money from the city, it's probably fine. If they do request money, you probably want to consider that. Generally, what you're describing to me sounds like it's probably fine. But again, this document is the council's document. And so City Manager Goldstein's and my interpretation of the document is not nearly as important as the interpretation by our fellow council members.
Okay, got it. My second question deals with the concept that we should be in closed session and respect closed session and not share that information with anyone else in the public. Is this following a California state law, or is this just a practice?
Yes, that is state law.
Okay, so if it is state law, is there a recourse other than what we've agreed to here? If you have proof or a pretty good idea that someone did breach that?
It's a misdemeanor to disclose information from closed session, so it would be up to the district attorney about whether or not to prosecute it.
Okay, so how would you proceed in a case like that?
I worry that we're getting a bit off topic here, and so I want to make sure that we're observing the Brown Act and discussing our rules for applying the Brown Act. But briefly, I'll tell you, if a Brown Act violation, if an allegation of a Brown Act violation came to me, I would discuss with the city manager the best way to deal with it. And if it involves a specific council member, I might discuss that with a specific council member.
Okay, thank you. I asked the question because I want to understand how this code of conduct works. So in voting for it, it's important for me to understand actually how it works. If there's actually mechanisms to enforce what we want to do in certain circumstances. That's the reason why I asked the question. That's it.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Bertrand. Any additional questions from council members? I just have one brief question. Can we pull the slides back up? I want to make sure I'm referencing the correct information. I think it was the next one. There was a
or we can look at the slides.
Well, basically, there was a suggestion that if there's any non-criminal, if there's a complaint that's determined to be non-criminal or non-legal in nature, that there will be an investigation. Who does that investigation?
So the determination first is whether or not it's a violation of the law.
Right.
And if it's a violation of the law, the city attorney would determine the appropriate path.
Right.
A violation of the law, that could mean potentially an allegation such as Councilmember Bertrand brought up, as closed session material was being leaked. It could be allegations that someone accepting money in some way,
right,
and things like that. If it's none of those things, really what it is we have language in here that says that council members will ensure that the meetings are held in a fair and equitable manner, be civil, polite, and respectful. If that's what the allegation is, it's really kind of beyond anything that, as a city manager or city attorney, we could adjudicate or really say what process to follow. So at that point, we would work with the mayor and we would put it on the agenda for the council to decide. And the council would have some choices. They could say, there's nothing here. They could say, we would like to order an investigation of this matter, or they could render a decision then and there.
So that's my question right there, is if the council says we want to order an investigation of this matter, who does that investigation?
So I can answer that. Whoever you'd like to do the investigation, usually there's a whole bunch of employer investigators. There's a whole cadre of them out there. I actually do investigations for other clients. And so if you were interested in having an investigation done, I can work with the city manager and find you an investigator.
Okay, cool. Just curious. Thank you so much.
Or actually, let me add to that, sometimes depending on the nature of the allegation, sometimes the police department might be able to do the investigation.
Got it. Great, thank you. All right, with that, we will bring this to public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to address the council on this item?
I do not see any attendees with hands up, and I do not see any emails.
All right, with that, we'll get back to council for discussion and a motion and a vote. Any discussion? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Bertrand.
Yeah, I'm glad this was brought forward, and, I think that if we had anything before, I wasn't really aware of it. This is pretty comprehensive, and I appreciate staff working with our council and everyone else putting this together. It's definitely a good argument that this was missing. Obviously, we need to work together, and anything that detracts from that, I think, is going to detract heavily from our effectiveness as a city council. So to me, that's the main basis for this. We're trying to create something so that we have a reference, but the main point is we need to work together. I did bring up the sanctity, if you will, of closed session. That's particularly important because if we can't discuss things amongst ourselves, knowing that it's just amongst ourselves, that completely stabs everyone else in the back. It's very disrespectful. So I want to emphasize that to everyone as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bertrand. Councilmember Bosworth?
Motion to approve staff recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Bosworth and a second by Councilmember Bertrand. Any additional council comments? Seeing none, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Councilmember Bottorff.
Aye.
Councilmember Bertrand.
I agree.
Councilmember Story.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Brooks.
Aye.
And Mayor Peterson.
Aye.
Great.
Thank you. Carries unanimously. Thank you to the staff and council that worked on that. We're going to move on to our final item of the evening, item 8C, onboarding process update, and I'll turn it over to staff.
All right, I am going to run the slides here for Chloe.
Yes, thank you, City Manager, and thank you, Mayor and Council. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Great. I'm just going to be transparent and let you know that I actually cannot see the screen, so I'm going to be looking at my notes, and the City Manager is going to help me run the slideshow. So thank you for your patience with our technology this evening. I'm just going to briefly discuss what staff has suggested and pulled together about the onboarding process for new council members and newly appointed officials for the City of Capitola. So our first slide is going to focus on what's already in motion and what has been scheduled by staff. The first being what we typically have done in the past and what we're doing yet again this year is the candidate orientation, which is a focused presentation that's actually happening just in the next few days for all candidates that are running for City Council. It's an overview of city operations and really a great background on the City of Capitola. This will ensure that candidates are well informed on Capitola operations, how we're organized, and the different services that our city offers community members. And the second activity that I'm personally looking forward to is a training opportunity given later this month by the City Clerks Association of California. I'll be attending. It's something I think that perfectly addresses the Vice Mayor's concerns and will allow us to learn more about best practices for onboarding newly elected officials. And I'll be taking notes and writing everything down, best practices and any good ideas that we can then implement to welcome new members. So moving forward to the next slide, these are some suggested activities that staff brainstormed and is presenting to you this evening, the biggest of which is a new council workshop. This would be something that would take place early in 2021 in January after the election and after we have our new council. The tentative plan would be to present the council handbook, the newly adopted code of conduct, thank you for that, and also to go over any pertinent administrative policies. So what's nice about this is it'll be happening, in the future once our new council is in place, and the mayor at that time can really coordinate with staff to make sure that the agenda for that workshop is to their liking and that it addresses all concerns and questions. After that workshop, staff would present a similar one that's more targeted for appointed officials that would also discuss the Brown Act and, again, relevant administrative policies for those new members. And then the last two ideas, one is to have city attorney one-on-one meetings for new council members and perhaps council that want a refresher on the very specific role that our city attorney Zutler plays for the city, and to be able to ask any questions of her they may have. And then the last is something that I know currently takes place and that would continue into the future, which is the city manager one-on-one meetings with new council members and current council members, to make sure that those members feel welcomed and fully informed of what's going on and how the staff and council work together every day. So those are really what we're suggesting. That's just an overview of what staff has put in place already and what we think is a great idea moving forward, just so that all new members feel welcome and feel like they can achieve what they are setting out to do so in a positive way. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'm available to answer any questions, though you may want to ask the city manager, which is fine with me. I'm here if you need me.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions on this item from council? I'm seeing no questions, so we will go to public comment. Is there any public comment on this item?
I do not see any attendees, and I do not have any emails.
All right, with that, I will bring it back to council for discussion. I believe there's not a vote on this item, correct? We're just providing feedback?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any comments on this? Councilmember Bottorff.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is a great program. We seem to have a field this year of a lot of new people that will be running for council, and depending on the results, there may not be a lot of background. So I think that these type of programs, meetings with the city attorney, meetings with the mayor, the more input that is able to be delivered to them is more helpful for them to get off to a good start. So I commend this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bottorff. Yeah, I agree. I think this is a great opportunity for us to bring people on board in a way that will give them an opportunity to learn as much as they can up front. And I know that programs like the League of Cities also provide some great training, but I think to have one that's Capitola specific is really important. And this is an exciting opportunity. So I want to, again, thank you. I believe this was also Vice Mayor Brooks who wanted to look into not only the code of conduct, but the onboarding process. And so thank you for bringing that up and getting this in motion, and for our staff that put together these ideas. Councilmember Bertrand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I feel quite positive about this, and it's a great opportunity for all the board members to, the new ones and the current ones, to talk and get to know each other. So there's that added bit.
Great, thank you. All right, any additional comments on this item? Seeing none, that was just an information item for us to provide feedback on. It sounds like we're all pretty excited about this opportunity. And with that, we have reached the end of tonight's agenda. So thank you all for joining us this evening. And as always, please take care of yourselves and take care of each other, and we will see you next time. Meeting adjourned. Good night.
Okay.
Goodbye.